Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Workforce Wednesday webinar. My name is Kirsten Bayer with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support, and I will be your moderator and technical support for today's session. Today is a performance session, so before we get started with that, just a couple of housekeeping things before I hand it over to Mark Burgess and his team. First, this session is being recorded, so we will have the recording available for you within 48 hours up on our website. I will put the website with the direct link to the slide deck here in the chat. I just went ahead and put it in there. The slide deck did have a couple just minor typos, so we're going to get that updated, but it is the most recent information there on that slide deck, so feel free to download it right now if you'd like to follow along with the presenters. We also will be having a follow-up survey and follow-up email at the end of the session that we will push out to all of you. If you have 5 minutes in your workday, we would greatly appreciate that. You'll receive that follow-up email with the survey and access to the recording and slide deck tomorrow. If you have any questions during the session, we just ask that you put those in the chat or the Q&A so we can go ahead and save those in case we don't have time to get to them. We can send out an FAQ if we need it. And then also just allows for the presenters to reread the questions if they need to do so. So we'll ask that you go ahead and put those in the chat. And then I'm going to start us off with our beginning Workforce Wednesday webinar poll. So first of all, we just want to know where your local area is. I'm joining you from Central Illinois today. And I know we have people across the state and even potentially statewide as well. So we appreciate you answering this quick poll just for our analytical purposes. The presentation is available, Debbie. I went ahead and put it in the chat. I'll go ahead and put it in there again, just in case you were just joining. You might have not seen that link, but I went ahead and put it in there again for everybody. Okay, I'm going to end that poll and share the results. So we have most of us from Northern and Central Illinois and up above or up by Chicago as well. A couple of you from Southern Illinois and one person from statewide. So thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it. Our next poll is just which partner do you best represent? And if you do end up selecting other WIOA partner or other WIOA stakeholder, if you could be more specific in the chat, we will note that for our analytics. You should be able to select that still. Yep. Okay. Great. Thank you so much for putting in the chat, Christina. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So we have a lot of career planners today, a couple directors, system administrators, local board staff. So thank you all for joining us, and we will get those analytics to Mark and his team, and we appreciate it. And I'm going to hand it off to Mark Burgess to get the presentation started with his team.
Great, thank you, Kirsten. And please, if you selected other on either of those two options in that last poll, let us know where your what your role is in the chat pod so we can see. Especially interested to see how many other training providers might be on the call today because this will affect them in some aspects, and we'll get to that during the presentation. This is our demand occupation training team. We review all the information that's submitted, especially in petitions, but we get together whenever we receive those, review them, and ensure that our lists are accurate, get the approvals together if we're going to approve, send out all the information of those. So You're familiar with myself, Mark Burgess. I'm the performance manager, been leading these training webinars for the last several months. This is a little bit of a deviation from performance specifically, but certainly fits into overall performance of our system. Paula Berry's our resident kind of expert on performance. So she'll be joining us and discussing a little bit of our systems. And then Shannon Hampton, been with our program now for a couple of years, I think, and is a great help in helping us review those petitions and look at other information. So please welcome Shannon to our team. You're not familiar with her potentially. Some of you might be if you're working on some of the grants she's been involved with. Today, we're going to go over several things that are related to transitioning from 2010 coding to 2019 with respect to standard occupation codes, or what we're more familiar with them as ONET codes. Before we do that, we do want to remind you of our demand occupation training list criteria and tiers to ensure everyone understands that. It'll be important to know how our list was created as you see all the changes that are occurring. They're probably not as significant as you might think on your end of it. Certainly on our end of it, the programming of this has been very critical and very lengthy time to get these all in place. And I'll say this a couple times throughout the presentation, but the changes we're talking about, you would have received potentially a WIOA notice on Monday. And they outline what those changes were and provide you with a new draft list going into the changes that will occur next week, either Monday or Tuesday, depending on what your system is. So we wanted to get this information out to you before those changes occurred so you could be prepared as best as possible. You can take a look at the WIOA notice change 2 that was issued by Laura Dom yesterday. We're going to go through what was contained within that, show you some get you some visualization of what it looks like now. We've added some fields, taken some off, but be mindful, none of the criteria that we'll discuss has changed. We also want to give you a little bit of resources so you can become more familiar with 2019 coding, where you can find information regarding to occupations, especially for our career planners, as you work with your participants and customers. And then for you training providers, we want to let you know what had to happen in our systems with these changes, and hopefully we're attacking that all in the back end of things. There's not really much you need to do, but we will discuss a little bit more about that. And then I did want to revisit the petition process. So for all of you that might be in a role at the local area, working with the local boards to submit petitions to add occupations to the training list, you'll want to stick around for that. We'll have opportunities again to go through any of your questions you might have a couple different times. So as we all know, I always start these off with our realization that we do have some regulations, some acts, some guidance that we have to comply with. Here's just a few of those coming from the WIOA itself or the final regulations. And most important is that third one there where we identify why a demand occupation training list has to be created. It's a responsibility of the State Workforce Board. And so our Illinois Workforce Innovation Board convened a work group to determine the criteria that eventually was used to create the demand list back in July 1st. If you recall, we changed from a regional structure to a statewide structure, and that was all the result of the work that was done through that work group. So we'll discuss that a little bit more. We also have statewide policy and guidance. And I've got a little bit of difference of information here. Just note that on the left here, we have a change to that I said Laura Dom sent out on Monday. So if you're receiving her automatic emails, you should be taking a look at that. When I created this visual, it was still in the change 1 mode. That might be updated by now. But when you go out to policy 7.3 here at the top and go over to the notices on the right, you'll have to open that up by clicking on the plus sign. It then shows a minus. You'll see all these attachments, and one of those will be this notice. That's where you'll find all this new information, all the guidance on the updates from this transition from 2010 to 2019. And some other documents, including the petition. So become familiar with that, especially those of you that have become real familiar with 2010 codes, this will be, you know, some semi-significant shift to you to find the new codes that relate to those that you're familiar with. If you're one that does just a basic search to find occupations, you may not notice much difference, but we'll show you another source that you may not be familiar with or may be familiar with that's being updated to help you with those searches. So what is the demand list? It is our requirement to meet that obligation that I mentioned in the WIOA Act that says we have to create a list of demand occupations, develop criteria to get to that point. And the three criteria we use are annual average job openings, or AAJO, the education and occupation training level that a majority of employers indicate is needed to qualify and be considered for openings, and then median hourly wages. Here again are the two policies and the guidance that I mentioned. So take a look at those again and ensure that you're familiar with all of that. So here are the three pieces of guidance, I'm sorry, the criteria that we go by. I'm going to blow this up a little bit. We have the annual job openings created by a formula of the overall number of openings compared to a 0.01%. This is very similar to other states, so that's why we went with this as that criteria as a work group. We move over, we see the education. We want demand to be something that requires a level of training beyond a high school education only, with just a minimal amount of OJT. And so it's indication of high school diploma and moderate OJT, up to and including bachelor's degrees with long-term OJT. Anything above that is not considered in demand because we don't think it's a good use of funding to train somebody for, you know, 6 to 8 years in a program for the return on investment there. So that's why we have that book, and I'm going to show you a little bit on that here in a moment. And then the third one is wages, and this is data based off of a living wage, and that information's out there on the internet if you want to find that. You see the link here, and then we go down further. You see these, I'm not going to zoom in on these, but you see there's 30 different levels of education and OJT from 2 to 31. It has to be, in order to meet the criteria, you have to be between levels 7 and 25, including 7 and 25. So anything below 7, anything above 25 generally would not meet the criteria. We'll talk about petition process later, that might be a consideration that can be relaxed. But for the most part, we need to keep within that range to use our funds and invest wisely with the limited funding that we do have. Going a little bit further into this, you can see there's tiers. So when you look at the three criteria, we compare that. If it meets certain elements, we consider whether it be high priority, growth, or moderate, whether it was added by a petition or whether it's a low priority. These top two green levels met all three criteria at a very high level, including this highest one that includes a bachelor's degree as the minimum education. Anything in the second level of the green can be any of those education and training requirements between 7 and 25 other than bachelor. And when you notice the demand list, when we get to that, the tiers over here reflect the color coding on the right. So we have tiers from 1 to 6 that are in demand, and then 0, which we consider as low demand or not in demand. And then the middle level there in the gold and yellow is our criteria. We've allowed one of the three criteria to be relaxed a little bit. So you want to know which one that fits in. And then the bottom 2 tiers of orange are added by petition. So there are 2 petition processes, whether they be by state petition, meaning we have some statewide grants or something of that nature that we need to address, and so we can add occupations related to that, or the local priority. So you've petitioned us as a local board, working with the Title I providers, sorry about that, to request that a consideration be made and approval on petition. So we've done that in many cases. We've rejected it or denied some of those in cases. And then the last one on the bottom there, we call low priority. And in fact, red, tier 0 is not in demand. We say low priority because there are some exceptions to the policy of using a training only to demand occupations, because those are for individual training account funded training programs. There are other type of training programs that you can go off the demand list to train, such as registered apprenticeships or on-the-job training, OJTs directly with an employer. So anything in red can be used for those, but they cannot be used for ITA funded training. So that's why the low stays there, but in most instances, please note they're not in demand for our ITA training. So let's jump into the 2010 to 2019 transition. As I mentioned, we kind of use interchangeably the Standard Occupational Classification System, or SOC SOC codes, with the ONET codes. There's a website out there, the ONET online, that you can see on this slide, that gives you a wealth of information, gives you all of the codes and titles and then other information for each of those occupations. And we commonly refer to this as ONET codes, but we do have SOC code referenced in many places. So just realize that they're the same for our purposes, even though they're kind of two different sources of information. With this new change, there are many more occupations that have been added to the demand occupation training list. They fit within 23 major groups by industry. And then, like I said, they're categorized based on job duties, skills, education, training, things of that nature that employers have indicated are requirements or characteristics of a particular occupation. The Standard Occupational Classification System then categorizes that occupations. As we all know, employers use different titles, different names for different occupations, or maybe for the same occupation. So this standardizes that so that we are all working with the same book when we look at a code and a title. And in fact, on the ONET code website, they'll give you some examples of those titles that employers might use commonly that don't match exactly the title of the code itself. So become familiar with those. And actually, as you work further down here, the 2019 codes are actually from a 2018 structure that the classification system used. And then we use only the 6-digit codes. If you go out to the full list, if you go out to ONET, you'll see an 8-digit code similar at the bottom there, where there's a 2-digit after a decimal that further defines different occupations beyond the 867 I mentioned earlier. But we eliminate the decimal and the digits after that and rely only on a 6-digit code. So this example here, if you looked at two occupations with the decimal 00 and decimal 03, it would actually appear together as one occupation, but both occupations are captured within that 6-digit code. So, we aren't eliminating any because they have digits after the decimal. We're just combining them to shorten up the list and make it a lot easier for programming, for review, for your purposes, career planning discussions with your participants. Here's what that kind of looks like in the new updated version. If you received the notice on Monday, you would have saw this. The two big changes here are that we have kept the 2019 codes. So if you are familiar with a particular code in we kept the 2010 codes. So if you're familiar with those codes, you'll be able to cross-reference to the new 2019 code. Now we've sorted this by the 2019 code. So in some instances, you're going to have to maybe search for the 2010 version because it may have fallen down the list and not be numerically in order with the 2019s. So that's the first one. The second was that we removed a field or a column that was 2018 employment, because we didn't feel that had any real relevance to a demand occupation. What it was significant of is just identifying how many openings are projected across the nation. And since we use a statewide list and we're really concerned about Illinois, unless we're talking some of those border states that we need to find some information from those states specifically, a national number isn't really useful in determining demand. So we pull that off to kind of clean up the list a little bit. There's a lot of color going on here already, and more information than we need isn't really necessary. But what I did here, what we're trying to do with the color coding in the 2010 and 2019 columns is just helping you identify whether something existed before and no longer exists, which is the blue highlights under 2010, or whether it didn't exist in 2010 and now exists in 2019. Just a quick reference, may not be useful for any of you. We just thought we'd do this. But I will say with that, it was not the easiest process to try to capture every single one of those when cross-referencing. So if you see an occupation you feel is not highlighted appropriately in the blue or purple fields, don't hesitate to email me and let me know what the codes are and which year they are for, and I'll take a look at this, and if we have to update it, we will. Just also note, we update this routinely, whether we have petitions or other changes. You should always be going out to the WorkNet e-policy site and pulling the most current version, because there might be a typo error or something like that we don't feel necessary to send out a brand new email and brand new list to everybody. But we will update as necessary on the site itself. So you might want to go to there on a frequent basis as you pull this up to see if there's a new version. I'll always put an updated date on the bottom left in the footer, so you'll know if it's been updated, even if we don't send an email out. But if it's a significant change that changes demand or something of that nature, we will certainly send that out so you're all made aware of that and don't have to rely on just going back to the site to see if those kind of things have changed. Here's some things you need to know with this transition or conversion. No occupations that were in demand in 2010 have been removed. So be confident that if you've been working with customers, with participants, or you're familiar as a training provider with the codes that you had that were in demand previously, all of those demand occupations remain under the new transition. They just may have new numbering and may have new titles based on what that transition dictated. Also very important for those using the Illinois Workforce Development System, IWDS, not real sure if this applies to the Career Connect system, but please do not use the dash between the second and third digit of these codes. For some reason, our system is seeing that and creating error messages on a routine basis. So we ask that you just use the simple 6 digits without the dash and decimal and anything after the decimal as we show here. And going back to that example on the previous slide, a couple slides ago, you see here's an example of how we took the 8 digits from 8 to 6. Even though there were 2 codes there, it's really only considered 1 code because we're looking at the 6-digit code. Let me kind of zoom in on this area. So we remove the digits, we remove the decimal, and it's the same code. So there's no reason to have 2 of the same code. So what you'll actually see in the list is only the top code. So even though only chief executives is the title, you'll see chief sustainability officers is also included in that because we're really relying on the code, not the title. And so just be aware of that. And you'll see that by the fact that it's the same data, same information all the way across the line that indicates it's the same occupation when you look at it in the system. Here's an example of the 6. I'm hoping there to work more than 6, but this seems to be the 6 various ways that something might have changed. You can see these at the top listed textually, and then a reference to each of them below in a kind of a visualization of the list itself. So in number 1, you might have had simply no change at all. Quite a few of the occupations didn't have a change, so everything remains the same as it was before because of that. In number 2, it might have remained unchanged as far as the code from 2010 to 2019, but the occupation title maybe have changed. So I did not include, for space saving measures, did not include the 2010 title here, but it was just radiologic technologist. Didn't include the words and technicians, but under 2019, they added that to this occupation. Number 3, you might have had a code change, but not a title change. So you see here on the left 2 columns, the code change, but the title was the same. I'm sorry again, I'm having a little bit of trouble with my computer. Sometimes mouse. So I'm jumping around here. Apologize for that. So the computer user support specialist didn't change. In several instances, an single occupation code in 2010 morphed or split into 2, 3, or more codes, and you see that here under number 4. Again, if something was in demand in 2010 coding prior to what we're going to see effective next week, then all of the split codes retain the demand tier relevance. So you see here, 1 occupation became 3. All 3 of those are still in demand, even though we only had 1 in the past version. They could also have instances. Number 5, the difference between 4 and 5 are basically the same, except in 4, the original code remained and just was changed by the title, and some of the portions of that title was split into those other 2 titles. But in option 5 here, the original title disappeared totally. You won't see 25, 90, 41 on the new 2019 list of coding. Don't ask me necessarily why some of these changes occurred. It was all about recognizing more accurately the employment opportunities that are out there. But why some stayed and some didn't, I really can't tell you. And then the final example there is that the occupation did not exist in 2010 because there was no information. What I mean there is, if you look at the 2010 listing, this occupation didn't show up at all. And we decided back then that when we created the demand list, if we didn't have any data under the 3 criteria, we just omitted it from the list. This time around, we decided to go ahead and let you see all 867 occupations. So quite a few of them were added in here, even though they still aren't in demand. They're added in so you can at least see every occupation that is in that high-level 6-digit coding. A final thing here on the demand list, and then we'll take some questions. I know quite a few have been coming in the chat pod. This is a statewide list. We used to have the regional list, as I mentioned before, but going to a statewide list, it creates some I don't want to say issues, but it creates some thoughts that you have to have, especially as a career planner, because it doesn't dictate whether there's demand in your local area or even in your region anymore. So you have to do a little bit of research to find out, just because it's on a statewide list of demand occupations, is it really in demand in your area? And more importantly, is the participant willing to include that occupation in their consideration if they aren't going to relocate or commute, if the true and real demand is in a different location, maybe even in a different state, different region especially. So, as you can guess, in a state like Illinois, a lot of the data is kind of dominated by information from Chicago and the surrounding counties. So if you're down in Southern Illinois, Western Illinois, even some of those collar counties potentially, maybe there's not a real true demand in your area. Even though it's on the statewide list, you have to be cognizant that maybe there's not demand in my area and it's not a good choice for the participant. They certainly could be enrolled in training. They certainly could have a positive, successful outcome from that training, but then they have difficulty finding a job because of the lack of demand in that area. So you really, as a career planner, have to work with that participant to understand that while this list is, fairly extensive, not every occupation is a good opportunity for them. And so they need to consider that. Also, the Act, while we don't have policy that dictates this, the Act talks about the fact we should be training towards the potential for self-sufficiency, to support self-sufficiency. So let the participant know that, hey, this job is on the list, but it only has, let's say, $15 an hour wages as the median wage that met the criteria. Is that good enough for you and your family? Are you willing to train towards that occupation with that wage, knowing that you have 2 kids, and if you really looked at a self-sufficiency calculation, you might be better off looking for something at a much higher wage. Again, it's on the demand list. It's available to be chosen, but is it really a good decision? And that between is a conversation between the career planner and the participant that needs to occur every single time. I can't emphasize enough, just because it's on the demand list doesn't mean it's in demand in your area or is a demand good opportunity for your participants. So you really need to be looking at these for every single participant, or until you have enough knowledge of any particular occupation that okay, I've already researched that. I know that this occupation is in demand in my area, and now I have another subsequent participant interested in it. And then finally, all of these conversations should be documented in the individual service strategy or individual employment plan as appropriate, to document that these conversations are occurring, that they're not occurring in a closed door, that someone just basically gave a link to some place to go search for information and then ask the participant to let them know what occupation they want. You really got to work with them so they fully understand what the implications are here. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at some of these questions. I appreciate you bearing with us there.
Mark?
Kirsten, you wouldn't mind reading through them, or Dina?
Yeah, no, Mark, there, just FYI, there's no real questions. We seem to have a spammer or a bot that is putting a lot of gobbledygook.
It's Patel. Hey, Kirsten, I wish I would have seen that. Kirsten, he's been around for years in our WIOA Wednesday webinars. If any of you are common to those, Patel. I don't know what the deal is, but can you kick that person out of the room, Kirsten? Sorry about that, everyone. Yeah, they know something about the system, but it's never truly relevant to what we're doing. So I appreciate that you acknowledge there's no questions we need to address. We'll go ahead and move on to the next section. Continue to use the chat pod if you have questions come up as we go along. If you backtrack to something I said before, don't hesitate to put that in there, and we'll come back to it. All right, so I said we'll show a couple resources or some of the systems you need to use that rely on ONET codes, demand occupations. The first one we really, for if no other reason, for better usability, we really think you should be using the demand occupation search that's out on Illinois WorkNet. A wealth of information that will help you have those conversations, those meaningful conversations with the participant is held here. You can find similar information on other, private type or public type websites such as Indeed or the ONET website. You can find some of this information even in the IWDS system, but it's just not very user friendly to go to IWDS and look for what jobs are in demand. So we really recommend you go out to this search site. You can put a simple demand occupation search Illinois WorkNet in your search engine, and you should be able to see this as one of the top, if not the top result. So go out there. There's a video there, as you see on the right, that will give you some understanding of the system and what is all available here. Just recognize that may not have been updated with these new changes, so we might have to get a new video, but I think the majority of the information remains the same in the video. We'll have some really good usefulness in you understanding what's out here. There's several ways you can search for an occupation. If a participant comes to you and says, hey, I want to get in the healthcare field, but they don't really know what, well, then you can go into a career cluster. You can put an occupation such as nursing in the keyword search and see what occupations come up that relate to that. SOC code, if you know it and want to plug that in and get directly to that one occupation that relates to that SOC code, you can use that. I don't know if I find that as useful because I don't know these codes specifically. I generally have to go through one of the other search engines or search fields. But on the right-hand side, you'll see demand tier and education. So we'll show you what the demand tier looks like. If you pull that down, if let's say all you really want to see is every occupation that's considered in demand, then you can use that blue highlighted drop-down item to select everything that's a tier 1 through 6, and it'll produce a list of the hundreds of occupations that are actually in demand. Or if you want to search for one, let's say an individual says, I really don't want to go to, go to a 4-year institute. I don't even really want to go to a high level institute. What's something that doesn't require as much education? Then you can go to the education OJT drop down and say, well, let's start picking some of these that require a high school diploma or equivalent plus some long-term OJT as an example, or some college, but only resulting in a certificate rather than a degree, or other non-degree type award with the various levels of OJT that are listed there. So, that'll help you kind of whittle down the occupations that'll show up for that individual to search, especially when they're pretty certain that they don't want to go to school, or they only want to go to an associate's degree. So I don't really need to see the ones with bachelor's degree. You can start filtering down from there, and you can always produce your results in Excel. There's a field above this that allows you to export into an Excel, and then you can do some sorting if you're familiar with using Excel to help you get some better results. So let's just look at an example. We'll go back here real quick. So I'm going to pull up general and operations managers as an example. So I filtered by the demand tier number 6, which is the highest demand, requires at least a bachelor's degree. And here's just the first 3 that show up that I chose to show you. And if I go into, let's looking at the very first one, general and operations managers, you see the basic information that met the criteria. So all 3 of these criteria listed got it on the demand occupation list as in demand because it met the 3 criteria. You'll see in blue over here on the left hand, some career information and also some occupation demand details. So the occupation demand details is pretty limited. Use that and see if it's helpful to you, but really the career information is what's most useful to have discussions with your participants. When you select that, you get this field at the top, and then you can scroll down to quite a bit more information. You can see some wages. You can see what the growth is. You see 3 fields up there we'll get back to that have some drop-down menus, and it tells you that it is in demand. Here's further down that list of information. What does it take to prepare for this job? And this one's saying, obviously, a high school education. In addition, you need the bachelor's degree, which we already knew. And you probably need 5 years or more of related work experience. So back to the career planning. Is this really a good occupation, even though it's in demand, for somebody that does not have up to or even near the 5-year experience that most employers are looking for? So it's probably not a good choice for a lot of our participants, even though it is in demand. So that's that whole thought process you have to do as career planners in determining whether it's suitable for the individual or whether they're suitable for it. And then further down, you see the working conditions. So I always, when I get to this field, use the over-the-road truck driver as an example. As we're amazed by the amount of individuals that get through successful training, get a good, well-paying job, and then a year or so later they drop out because they find out what over-the-road truck driving really means. So we want to make sure that the individuals understand what they're getting into, or what they would potentially be getting into with the job itself before they make that decision, before they enroll in training and get through, and before they get into that occupation and find out it's really not for them. And in some cases, this may not be enough information. You might use some of those other sources, but we want to make sure they truly understand before they make decisions, and especially before the funds for training start getting expended through enrollments. And then some other additional information down here on the growth and wages on a scale. I mentioned the 3 drop downs. I'm not going to go into all 3 of these, but you can see what's contained within each of them. Again, a lot of good wealth of information that is pertinent to a participant making those wise decisions. I'm going to turn it over to Paula Berry to talk a little bit about the system and what's changing in the system, and where you should be familiar with the ONET code usage. So Paula, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. So yes, like Mark said, I'm going to provide a brief refresher on how you actually record the ONETs in IWDS. As Mark mentioned, for any type of information you want to find for an ONET search, Illinois WorkNet is much user-friendlier, but this is the system of record for adding or attaching an ONET code to an approved training program. So they're added via the training program basic information screen in IWDS. Next slide, please. So this is the field in the training program basic information screen. I'm sure you're all aware of it. It's where you update all your program information for those that are on the ETPL. So this is the field where we add our ONET codes. And like Mark mentioned before, it's important not to include a dash after the second digit. It causes all kinds of errors in the system. So this is the field. You simply type in an ONET code up to 5. If you know the code off the top of your head, and you would click add. If you want to search an ONET code while you're in the system, you can click on the search option, and this will display a list of categories that you can select from, or you can type in a word from the label, from the occupation itself, and search or pick from that list. The system will allow you to add any ONET code to a training program. However, you must have at least one occupation attached, one ONET that is included and approved on the DOTL. So if you enter 5 of these, that's fine, but just realize one must be approved, or it will do no good because the system will deny a participant to be enrolled in the program. Next slide, please. And this is just displaying a refresher of once you have clicked that add ONET occupation, this is what the screen will look like. That checkbox is clickable. You can add and remove ONETs to a program using that checkbox, and then you would save your program. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is what I was referring to, mentioning the importance of having at least one ONET that is approved on the statewide DOTL attached to your training programs, because when you get to enroll a participant in a training activity, I'm sure most of you are aware of this screen. If you're not, this is the actual service record screen where you would set up a training activity for a participant in real life. So you would select your certified training program and add the ONET that's approved on the DOTL. If you select or try to record an ONET here and save the service, you will get an error message that you have to have an ONET certified by the training program you're selecting. And if you could actually see the entire screen, you would see that the previous screen, the ONET I added, is directly associated with this program. Next slide, please. When you are in the training records screen, you can select the view available ONETs, and this is what it will display. In this situation, it will display only the ONET, the occupation that is approved for that training program. So you have easy access to see what ONET you should be selecting for your participants. And note that the list is color-coded to reflect all the tier colors that are on that DOTL notice attachment that you would also use as a reference. I think that's my last slide on that. Okay, so this is another depiction, just a refresher of the screen, exactly where you may enter the ONET in their training record, and where you would click the button to view available or search. Searching will go back, if you haven't entered an ONET, will display the global list, even those red tiers that are not approved. Clicking view available will again display the ONETs that you should be attaching to the record because they're approved. Next slide, please. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Dina Al-Khatib, who will go over some things she would like to mention about the Career Connect system.
Hi, everybody. It's Dina, and I don't have any slides. I just wanted to make sure for WIOA 7 agencies that are using Career Connect that we sent out notification yesterday. Career Connect is at the same time as IWIDS. All of our ONETs are getting converted throughout the system into the 2019 classification. We pull all of the ETPL data in from IWIDS, so those are going to be converted. And so we will pull that. We'll be pulling that converted data in, so everything should be in sync. I've been working with DCO over the last month or so, testing all of this, make sure it's working on both sides. So we will be ready to go. And I will put this in a chat just in case you missed it. We did send out information yesterday about kind of what's changing in Career Connect, some things to look at. I'm going to put the link to that information in the chat so people can access it. And the one thing that we're looking at is on our kind of guidance, our local guidance and procedures around the training programs. We're looking to see if we need to make any updates based on updates to the DOTL. If we do, we will get that updated and let you know. And then also, Mark had mentioned earlier, and Paula, about the dash. In Career Connect, actually, there's a lot of places where you will see the dash or you will see the 8-digit ONET code. Rest assured that when that data goes from Career Connect over to IWIDS, we're only sending the 6-digit without a dash. So no matter what it looks like in Career Connect, when it goes over to IWIDS, it goes into the format that they need it in. And I actually have been testing that, so I can say that with confidence. And then if you have any questions about the Career Connect changes, I can try to address that today if there's time. Otherwise, you can always reach us through the Career Connect help desk. And Paula and Mark, I do know that there are some legit questions that have come in from the field. And unfortunately, I just saw that it looks like our bot is back.
I just kicked them back out again, so they may come back again, but there are a few questions in the chat that we're going to go ahead and respond to. I didn't know if you had any specific, Dina, that you wanted to address that you've received since that notice went out in the last 2 days.
No, we haven't. Like I said, I'm going to put the link to our information in the chat so WIOA 7 folks can access it if they didn't already get it. The only thing, somebody did ask a really good question about, Dan White asked if the currently approved programs in IWIDS will be automatically updated from the 2010 ONETs to the 2019. And I can help answer that question to say yes, because I've been helping DCO and we've been testing it on both Career Connect and IWIDS. So that's what's going to happen in IWIDS on Tuesday morning. I believe it's Tuesday morning. All of the ONETs system-wide are getting converted from 2010 to 2019.
Yeah, thanks, Dina. And in addition to that, we will ask the training providers probably will want to go in and check that. We hope we've captured everything 100%, but more importantly, even if we captured everything and transitioned it over, you might see some different occupation codes that you're not familiar with. It might be a good opportunity for you just review your programs also and see if you've got all the codes in the system that you should, because sometimes that might be the restriction on a participant. They find an ONET that's an occupation that's in demand, then they go look for an associated training program, and maybe you didn't reflect that occupation, but it really would lead to that. So kind of widen your scope of potentially and make sure you've captured all the ONETs that truly are related to the training programs you have in the system. But yeah, hopefully we've captured all of them in this transition. You won't have to do anything from that respect. The same with customer files, participant files. They should transition those same codes over. But again, if you see any issues, email those directly to me. I'll work with our programmers to fix any situations we find that are not working appropriately. And then kind of related to that, someone asked if the Illinois WorkNet demand occupation search fields or that page has been updated. I honestly, I think it's updated. Whether they've got every single occupation in there yet, I would assume not, because they work off the IWDS system. So those fields are out there, you know, the new fields, the tiers and all that I showed earlier, but I don't know that it will be reflecting the newest set of 2019 codes, because it needs to match up with IWDS. So hopefully by next Tuesday, when IWDS goes live with this information, Illinois WorkNet's demand occupation search matches it as well. And I don't know if we have any WorkNet folks on the call that want to add to that. If so, feel free to jump in. We did have another question about how do you address people who are interested in occupations such as project management and other white collar positions, which is in demand in Chicago. So I think I'm going to try to interpret that, and Carmela, if I'm not, feel free to jump in and clarify. We have a state list of demand occupations. If a local area wants to use their funds through an ITA, it has to come off that list. A local area can further refine it and say, we don't feel like that's in demand or anything we want to train towards. We don't restrict them from being more restrictive in their local policy, but you can't go outside the state demand list. So that's where the petition process, we're going to talk here next, that's where the petition process comes in. If you have a local area, a board that thinks that we're not addressing some needs in that local area through what's already in demand, they need to submit a petition and show through appropriate data and information why they think it's in demand. But just because, and we know Chicago's going to be that large LWIA in the state, but it's probably driving a majority of these occupations anyway. So if what you're saying is possibly someone's interested in a job that seems like it's in demand in Chicago, but it's not on the list, unfortunately, until it's added to the list through petition, you can't use an ITA to train it. I'm going to go over some other options for that, but real briefly, there are exceptions to that rule, such as using work-based learning or career pathways. So we'll get to that when I get to the petition process to help you work through, if you were at the local area level trying to figure out how you can maybe address some employer concerns that our system isn't supporting their needs. So hopefully that helps there. I know we answered Dan's question. Yeah, we answered the then we answered the one on the Illinois WorkNet. So this other one says if a career planner or job seeker were to go into the search demand occupations in WorkNet, and if the individual tries to search for an occupation that has a 0 next to it, will an occupation profile be found? Yes. Again, that's all in there, though. The whole 860 some occupations will show up in WorkNet when it's updated. And the reason for that is these exceptions. We want them to know to say, hey, here's an occupation you seem to have interest in, but unfortunately an ITA won't support it. Maybe there's another option. Let's see if we can find an employer that would take you on in an OJT contract type situation that would work. Maybe there's a registered apprenticeship out there focused on that occupation, even though it's not in demand. Registered apprenticeships automatically are considered demand occupations. We don't add them to the list because we can't make them available to everyone in ITA funded situations. But the fact you're in a registered apprenticeship, more importantly, the fact that you have a job waiting for you at the end of successful completion is cause for considering that as a demand occupation, regardless of what the data says. So hopefully that helps. And I don't know if I've got everything there. Rory, help me out if you've got some more that maybe you need explained. Okay, so let me get through the petition, and I think I would like to go out and show you the ONET site. Seems like someone's asking for that link. Someone might have put it in there already. and the IDS site are two I'd like to show you if we've got time. But otherwise, I really want to get back to our presentation if we don't have any other specific questions. And I don't see anyone. Help me out if Dina or Paul, you see, but I'm going to go ahead and move forward. We can come back to any other questions. And if we end up with not enough time at the end here at 2:30 of getting to all the questions, we'll certainly address them through a Q&A or some other means, future webinar. So the last part of this discussion today is that petition process. And this is primarily, not to say career planners won't gain from this, because it might help your thinking process on why something's in demand, why it's not. Maybe you can promote your office to ask for a petition. But this is really going over the petition process. We've received a lot of petitions since the new criteria went into effect July 1st last year. And just want to kind of recap what that process is, and then give you some kind of tips and pointers of what's worked and what's maybe not worked as well. So this is a process to request addition of a occupation that's not currently in demand. So the first thing we ask is look at the most current list, not one maybe you printed off a year ago, to see if something's in demand. So that's it. Before you do the petition process, I would highly recommend you go out to the policy e-policy portal, look for the new updated demand occupation training list, and see if the occupation's on there, verify that it truly is not in demand. Save you a lot of work in doing this, because we know there's a lot of work on your end of it, a lot of work on our end of it to go through these. And we always appreciate your patience when some of these have taken a little bit longer to get through. The holidays didn't help in that respect. But again, this is only for requesting non-demand occupations be considered to be in demand. And there's a form out there. There are instructions out there as well to help you complete and include as much information as possible. But we want to make sure you include as much as you can. We don't think you can include too much information to support your contention that there's truly demand. Some of it's going to be really easy to justify, and some of it's going to be a little bit more difficult. We need to have your chairperson name and signature on these. And we do ask that you send those to this email here. It's a general demand occupation email. And that's simply because if you email just directly to me or Paula or even Shannon, we may be out for a period of time on leave or be tied up in other duties and won't be able to get to it as quickly as if it's here, because all three of us have access to this email. We're trying to check this on a regular basis. So hopefully if one person's absent, another person can pick up the slack in their absence, and we can get you a lot quicker. And we might add, especially recently, we had almost 40 petitions submitted, all within a couple weeks of each other. And as we were reviewing the first set, the second set had some duplicates. And we apologize that maybe we should have thought of this beforehand, but if you have a list of occupations you want to petition, or even a single one, if you want to email us first and say, hey, is anyone else already requesting petitioning this occupation? We'd like to save you the trouble and time it takes to complete a petition if somebody's already in the pipeline of consideration. And I think there were a handful that were that way, that we didn't even have to review the second set of them, because we were approving them through the first set of petitions. So, don't hesitate to email and say, hey, we'd like to consider this occupation. Can you tell us if anyone else has already petitioned it? On the other hand, just because someone else has petitioned it doesn't mean you might not have reason to, because we might reject the first petition based on the data and information they provide, and you might have something that's more substantial and be able to substantiate us providing an approval. We've done that on at least one, maybe a couple of the occupations, because what was given to us just wasn't sufficient for approval the first time around, but we did gather some additional information that really helped us make a decision. And then, so some key considerations now. If it doesn't meet the criteria, and we've got three of those, can you justify why your petition and the information you're submitting would incline us upon review to consider it in demand when it didn't meet that criteria? So make sure you're giving us enough substantiated information to say, well, it didn't meet the 646 occupations, but it has a good wage, but we are submitting it because we're seeing at least 500 occupations. Okay, so that still didn't meet the criteria, but that's getting pretty close. And I'll mention that here in a moment, where we relax the criteria depending on the overall package that's submitted in that petition. But if everything just kind of fails as far as the information, it really isn't showing much in the way of demand, isn't really showing good wages, it just doesn't show that it's a good use of funding, then we possibly could reject that. You know, we need it's really helpful when employers are letting us know there's a need. And just simply stating we have 3 employers told us they had a couple openings each isn't good enough, in the sense that a couple openings today doesn't mean there's openings in the future when someone might complete training. And a couple openings in Chicago isn't really good demand versus maybe a few more openings down in southern, eastern, western, some other areas of the state. So again, make sure you're thinking about the justification you're submitting, and let us know, employers. We've had some that employers wrote letters and said, here's what our need is and what we know there's a need is going to be long-term, things of that nature. Those are very helpful for us to review. Again, the one thing we really aren't going to relax is that education and training requirement. If it's not 7 to 25, we're not going to approve it unless you can show you found a majority of employers are really seeking something more. And we have at least one petition we approved that whether the data we were provided previously was an error or employers are requesting more. They supplied us with information that we verified that said that they're actually employers are actually looking for higher than a 7 as far as that education level. So we need that to justify going outside the boundaries of the criteria. For the most part, we're probably not going to approve a petition above the 25 level because it just really, again, isn't a good use of funds to spend 6 and 8 years in training. If we're trying to spend those, your local policy probably won't allow it anyway. The one exception we made recently was we have a state priority, a state grant, that the occupations associated with that grant actually were above the level 25. But our intention there was that you're not training in that master's degree occupation that got put on demand, that you're training in other occupations below it that are in the pipeline, that are in the career pathway that would lead to that occupation that was on the list. So you would train in something in the, maybe with an associate's degree or even up to a bachelor's degree if local policy allows, but probably wouldn't actually train in the master's degree program for various reasons, including your local policies. And we do ask in the last set of about 17 or 18 petitions was a kind of a combination of multiple LWIAs submitting together with signatures from multiple board chairs indicating, hey, it may not be in demand in my local area or my next door neighbor's local area, but when I look at 6 and 7 different local areas together, we feel like we have a good case for showing demand. And we approved quite a few of those. So work together with your local areas, take some time out. For those of you that are part of the IWP, maybe you have an opportunity at those to discuss your intentions for petitioning and see if anyone else wants to jump on board with you, especially downstate where the numbers just aren't that significant. You might be able to prove to us and show us with significant data and information that there truly is a need and there's a demand in some of these other counties and some of these other local areas that individually just wouldn't support it. So what can you use to support that? Use burning glass. That's got a lot more current information than what we get from IDS. We're hoping, but we know staffing concerns and the pandemic didn't help any, that we'll get more current updated information from IDS that we use to create the DOTL that we compare against the criteria. But if you see that Burning Glass, Indeed, Monster, some of these other sources have information that is valuable to supporting your claim to consider something demand, let us know. But please give us some documentation, show some screen prints. Otherwise, we tend to have to go back and try to recreate what you did to verify what's out there so we can see the entire picture. Letting us know that there's 800 job openings today without showing us what really you searched on isn't very good. And I'll get to that here in a minute. But if you can show us what you found in your research through screen prints, through prints, PDF documents, what have you, that's very helpful to our team that's reviewing these. And then, you know, the postings and openings, like I said, may not reflect what's going to be an opening when somebody completes training. So if I do a search on, let's say, Indeed today, and I see 800 openings, and the requirement is that I go through 4 years of training to qualify for that job, well, I don't know what the opening potential is other than what I have in my projection list in 4 years, unless you show me something different than what those projections are. We don't want to put someone in training just because there's an opening today when that opening no longer will exist in the future when they complete that training. So again, think about that as you're completing that petition and the information you want to provide us. Provide us historical success in employment placements. I know, you know, if an occupation is not in demand today, you're not going to train on it with an ITA, but you have historical data from when it might have been on a regional list with the old set of criteria, the old demand occupation training list. So you were potentially putting people in training at that time. And then subsequently, what kind of employment placement? We go out to our IWS printouts when we review these and see what those success are. We go to the SIC code and see of related trainings to that occupation to see if there was any success in the past, and that helps us make some of our decisions. And then again, back to where I mentioned the exceptions to the rule. Let's get our employers involved. Are they really committed to hiring WIOA participants after they successfully complete training? Just saying you have opening doesn't mean it's a good opportunity. I mentioned on a previous slide, we're not, or I didn't mention it, but I showed you a slide with a lot of different people looking for jobs, including our WIOA participants. People are coming out of their, they're paying for their own training to go through community colleges, go through private training programs, and we're competing with them for all these openings. We're not the only, what I always say to people, if you're familiar with this discussion on my end, I always say we're not the only game in town. Other people are looking for these occupations. So unless you can get some employers showing that they're committed to hiring WIOA participants, we're in that competition at the end of the day. So we got to be mindful that demand is demand, and just because an employer has an opening doesn't mean it's a good opportunity again for our participants. And then I mentioned this earlier for all of you that are training provider representatives today, you probably want to go into your programs at some point in the near future, make sure all the codes got transitioned over, compare it to the list, and see if there's any other occupations that maybe you hadn't captured previously that are associated that could be the result of your training programs. You might be able to add more on there, and think about the totality of it, and not kind of use blinders to say, well, typically this leads me to a entry-level accountant job, when that might be easier to transition to other jobs, other occupations. You have to show reasoning for that. You can't just kind of nonchalantly make those decisions, but you might be able to find some opportunities that help the system in your local area because you can attach other demand occupations to your training programs. Here's some what helped us get some approvals. So all of you that have been involved in that petition development process, the easiest one is show us new data that says there is information that supports the criteria. We've had that happen in some of these instances. Someone came to us and the old data said there was only 300 openings, doesn't meet the criteria, and you come in and you show us there's 600, 800 openings. And so if you see something new, make sure you use that, and that might be the easiest route in there. Same with openings, wages, either way. Maybe the wages, and we know some wages have been coming up because of the pandemic, because of some of the pushback on wages on these low wage occupations. If you're seeing that as occurring, let us know what you're seeing the new wage levels are, and we'll help consider that. It'll help us consider that and do some research into where that's coming from. But again, if you see that somewhere, try to capture that in a screenshot, a PDF printout or something, and show us where that resource came from. we need to make sure that the job postings, I mentioned this already, but if there's a number of job postings, we have to be able to equate that to the time frame in the future when someone would complete training. If I'm going into a 6-month-long training for a job postings, more than likely that posting, those openings are probably going to still be there. But if you're asking for an occupation that has a 4 to 6 year training span, I don't know that today's job postings is going to be as relevant to, when they complete that training in the future. So keep that in mind. If it's one of these one of these sectors where we see a lot of openings and we know they're going to still stay there, healthcare, hospitality, probably manufacturing, it might be a little easier for I understand that the postings of today will exist tomorrow, well into the future, I should say. And then again, if you've got majority of employers in your area saying, hey, we don't believe the recognition of the employment and training criteria is accurate, show us that you've got a majority of them employers that say we want something higher, so that we can get it on the list, or at least up for consideration. And then finally, some things that kind of didn't help us. It was good information, but it really wasn't helpful in us, wasn't substantial enough to have us approve. First one being repeated record here, but if you give us an occupation and the training level is 6 and you haven't justified anything above that, we're not going to approve it. Those are the easiest ones for us to review, because if there's nothing substantiating an education within our range, we're going to deny it. I want to say almost every time without saying every time. If you have employer request letters without really data, just an indication, say, hey, we have need, and someone says, I need one person. We got a letter that said, I need one person now. Well, our system can't respond now when it involves training. We're just not set up that way. If that's the case, let's figure out how we can use our participants that don't need to go through training, possibly. Maybe they have experience and maybe this is a good opportunity for them, so they don't really need training. But sometimes the employer information just doesn't justify it. Maybe you don't provide any new AAJO, annual average job opening or wage data. Again, makes it difficult to us to determine why we should add that to it. And I mentioned the job postings. And then when you do those job posting searches, be mindful of how those work. And I use this one because any of you that know me, I used to be an occupational safety and health specialist with DCO many years ago before I came to workforce. And if you put that search in there, when you look down the list of occupations that come up, some of them come up because the word safety is in there. Some come up because the word health is in there. And so you get occupations like senior investigator and analyst and community relations manager. Safety especially comes up in a lot of occupations, managers, supervisors across many industries put safety in their job duties, but truly the occupation you're trying to request a petition for isn't related to those occupations. So we got to know what you're searching for so we can, decide again and find out how many openings there are, compare it to the training that might be required, and see whether it's good for when those trainings could be completed. And then our last slide here, we'll get to the last question. Then we've had some new questions coming in. I mentioned there's alternatives. The demand list is designed to focus training funds through individual training accounts, but we can get to other occupations that aren't in demand in various ways. Work-based learning, I'd mentioned, registered apprenticeships, or RAPs, on-the-job training, customized training. The good thing about these is employers are involved. They're going to be able to help design a training program that's geared towards their needs. Maybe you get multiple employers together because they all have similar needs and beef up the OJT plan or program to meet their needs. I've mentioned this multiple times when we talk about this list. This is the easiest way through is if you can just get employers, if they're really harping for some needs to be met, work with them to hopefully try to get some OJTs. It's real experience. They're training on the job. It's a learn to earn model. These employees or these participants sometimes can't go 1 to 2 years without some kind of income because they're in training and it limits when they can work. but in this kind of model, they can work and, and earn some wages along the way. And then when they succeed, complete it successfully, they have a job waiting for them. So that's a good thing about that. The other one is career pathways, where maybe you want to train towards a job that's in demand, but you're asking to enroll in a program that's not in demand. If that's in that career pathway pipeline, our policy 7.3 allows you to train in each of those occupations up to and including the actual demand occupation. So keep in mind the career pathway model to get to that. We've had that used in the past. That existed for many years, even before we updated criteria back in July of last year. And always work with your other partners. Maybe they've got some funding sources that would help support the training program for a non-demand occupation when Title I won't. And then you can pick up the slack as far as funding goes in career services or supportive services. Maybe they can't. So think of all these other opportunities as you're trying to invest and find all the occupations that your participants are interested in. Once they've made some educated, some meaningful discussions have occurred, and they've made some wise decisions toward an occupation. All right, we've got about 15 minutes. Let's go ahead and get to some questions, and we'll see if we have a couple minutes at the end. I'll show you that ONET site real quickly. So it said, is there a possibility that the stock code or ONET code was chosen a customer service record, but that occupation code and title has been changed under this new system, would no longer be approved? No, Rory, we are hoping that all the transition, all the programming that have been done, both with IWDS and Career Connect, will capture anything was in demand before this conversion from 2010 to 2019 will transition over. Again, if you see an instance where that doesn't seem to be working right, let us know immediately. We'll look into it. It could be a programming error, it could be an error on our side in identifying it as demand on the list. And so the programmers didn't realize that it needed to be included. So let us know if you see errors, but hopefully come next Monday and Tuesday for the two systems, everything's going to transition over. Is there any way DCO would provide a report by WIOA with approved training programs and the ONET codes? I don't know whether that's available. Paula, if you can jump in, I don't know if there's if there's a report out there in IWDS that captures WIOA and all the approved programs and the ONETs associated. Might be a pretty lengthy task with 22 local areas, but certainly if it's available, we'd like to address it.
Right, it would have to be an ad hoc, and I'm assuming it would just be to identify the programs that had an ONET that needs updated. So we'll look into that.
Yeah, well, we'll work with our programs to see if we can add that in as a report that could be made available. Then someone's asking, how often are we going to be updating the demand list outside of petition requests? And we're hoping to do it more frequently than we did last time. That was a long process to get the updates in 2021. We've been given indication IDS should be able to provide us information every 2 to 3 years. The thing we're discussing now that we have to revisit with them is if their data is going to be related, associated with the 2010 still or 2019. So, even if they can get new data to us, we got to make sure we're comparing apples and oranges and how we would do that. We may have to, because if they're just now updating codes and employers trying to match the codes to employer information, it may be a few years before we actually get 2019 related data. I don't know that answer. We hope to, we just updated last year. We hope to be getting some new information in the next year or so, so that we can update this and do it on a routine, regular basis. So it's reflecting a little bit more current information as best possible. But it certainly, I don't think will be an annual thing, Rory. But we'll do our best to work with them to get it as frequent as possible. Another question, in rural areas, we're having very difficult time attracting MDs. Often we are referred to nurse practitioners for routine and preventative healthcare. If a person who is already an RN can go to school for 2 years and obtain nurse practitioner credential. Is this something that could be considered? You know, we could have you submit a petition. I'm not sure. I mean, this was a work group. I'm assuming only because I'm familiar from family that nurse practitioner requires a master's degree. We would have to revisit that as a work group because they explicitly said it's a matter of using the funds wisely on why we didn't include masters and above training program in this list, or occupations related to something requiring masters. So we would have to revisit that with a group. We can't probably do that in a petition process without that revisiting to understand, and it might have to go, you know, to higher level discussions to determine whether that is. We do understand that concern. We do know there's other jobs out there, but unfortunately, you know, again, with limited funds and that, we're trying to focus on what we have related to the criteria we're given. How frequently do state certified programs have to be recertified? If you have a new program and it's certified, or actually under new terminology under WIOA, it's actually considered eligibility certification. We still use interchangeably. If you're a new program, you get 1 year of eligibility, and then you have to resubmit to the local board, and then you get 2 years thereafter. So then you know, once you come back for the second and subsequent years, called continued eligibility, you'll get 2 years, and then after 2 years, you do it again. The only difference with that would be registered apprenticeship programs, which don't have a lifetime for that. We review those every 5 years internally just to make sure they're still active programs and they're not remaining on the list when they no longer should be. But it's a 1 year initial and 2 year continuing eligibility process. And currently that's that occurs through your local board with information that's submitted in the IWDS system. Let's see if we have any more. For how long are approved petitions valid? Petitions are approved at this point as long as the list is in existence until it's updated globally, meaning we get a new set of data and information from IDS, which is our source for the overall list. Once that comes out, then we go back to revisit what meets the criteria. Now, I think, you know, we probably should have conversations with that and look at petitions and see, you know, does the new data support the petition or not? Because, you know, it might be same situation. We wouldn't want you to go through a ton of work when you're going to submit the same information again, and we're probably going to approve it because it's based on the same. So we might have to visit that when we get to that point, Michelle, and all those that have been submitting petitions or considering petitions in the future. I don't want to, you know, concretely say all petitions will remain on when we get new criteria, or some will, or whatever. But we probably should look at that and see if there's reason to, you know, to consider some of them maybe being held over if depending on what the information was provided to us at that time the petition was approved. Not seeing any others. If anyone has any more, we do have a couple minutes. I'm going to go out here and first show you the, if I could type, ONET code. So this is your site, and you can go in here, and I'm just going to pull up, I don't even know if this is active, a number. You can go in there. If you know a number, you can search by that. So, oh, that's right. 3011 got replaced by 3012. So this tells you that. So I had an old code in my mind that was replaced by a new code. So here's your example, and here's all the information. Much of this is going to be similar to what you can find in the Illinois WorkNet demand occupation search, but I think there might be just a little bit more here than what they carry over. In fact, the source they use to populate the demand or the occupational list on WorkNet sometimes doesn't have information on all the occupations. And so what they're doing, if an occupation has no information from their source, they're going to direct you right here to the ONET site that does have information. So you're going to have one of two things. Either it's going to be readily available on WorkNet, or you're going to have a link to send you here. And again, you might find even more information here. So as a career planner, you might use them in conjunction to say, okay, initially what I see on Illinois WorkNet's looking good, but I want to do a little bit more research. And you might come over here and look at all this information especially these skills and abilities and the activities, because that's the key one, going back to my comment before, in suitability and appropriateness. Make sure these participants understand what the job entails and some of these critical and key elements of the occupation before they make a decision, so we aren't jeopardizing a successful completion or more importantly, successful employment because they find out later it really wasn't what they wanted. Sometimes, you have to have the hard conversation with them and just let them know that while it is in demand, it's probably not a good opportunity, and your local policies will support you in making decisions. Just because it's on the demand list doesn't mean a participant gets to train in it just because they want to. You have control over your funds, and you help them make those intelligent, wise, informed decisions. The other site I was mentioning, because I want to show you another source for local kind of and regional information. You go out to the IDS website. Under the Resource Center, they have labor market information. You can pull that up, and then they have information here. While we went away from regional and local demand lists, they first start off with producing statewide list, but then they go out and they break it down regionally and locally. So if you're trying to figure out something's in demand statewide, but what's my demand, you might want to go out here and look for it. And I looked up one, it was a 40 number, the first two digits on the 40 number was an advertising exec or something like that was actually in demand. But when I went to the example, not picking on anyone, but I went to LWIA 26 in this LWIA search for that occupation, it showed a demand of 2 every year. I'd have a hard time as a career planner suggesting to a participant that that's good opportunity if there's only 2 openings potentially over the course of a year that might be filled before they even complete their training. So, use it wisely. This information's out there. There's other sources of information. You just need to, you need to make sure you're making some educated decisions here along with your customer as you go along there. Another question came in: if we trained a customer for LPN, can we pay for them to bridge to an RN? If RN is in demand, I don't know why you wouldn't be able to do that, Debbie. We don't have restrictions that say if you get to one level, you can't train in another occupation in that field. If it's in demand, you can certainly train towards it. I think, again, back to the whole, what's your local policy? And what is kind of the end game you're trying to get to? I know LPN's a great example, RN's a great example. We know we need a lot of them throughout the entire state. We just know that over the last 2 years, it's a growing need everywhere across the nation, in fact. So it's probably a good candidate for demand in every area of the state. But you want to make sure that it truly is in demand in your area, and you want to make sure that the resources it would take to put someone through the training and then the outcomes are going to be positive before you make that final decision. Just because it's in demand, again, doesn't mean it's in demand for everyone in every local area. All right, I think that's our presentation today. Any other final questions? I don't have any. We might get you out of here 2 minutes early for a change. Appreciate your participation today. Look for additional information, look for updates to Illinois WorkNet, and look for that demand list out there on the e-policy associated with eligible training programs and providers. And more importantly, look for the changes in the system come early next week, depending on which system you're using. Our system, like I said, IWS will be updated by Tuesday, the 22nd. We're out for holiday on Monday, so that's why we went with Tuesday as the date. Any issues you have, please direct them to that demand occupation email, or if they're specific to you're having problems with iWiz or something like that, you can email me directly and I'll work with the programmers on those areas. Otherwise, I'll turn it back to Kirsten for any final housekeeping.
Yes. So
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark and Paula and Dina, for the information today. Just to close us out, we had someone in the chat ask, when will this training be available to review, and when will this session be available? This session is recorded and it will be available within 48 hours on the website I put in the chat. It's our Illinois Workforce Academy website where all of our Workforce Wednesday webinars are hosted. You can find the presentation slide deck there as well as the recording. And that same email link will be, or that same link will be sent out in a follow-up email tomorrow along with the follow-up survey. So you'll have all that information accessible to you.
Yeah, one last thing, Kirsten, I forgot to go one more slide. If you haven't registered, please register for next week's program exits webinar that was rescheduled from February 2nd due to weather concerns. And we were going to touch on follow-up services in that as well. That the title doesn't reflect it, but the content we will touch on follow-up services. So look forward to you all registering and attending next Wednesday as well.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you.